Thank you, Chair. This is a report regarding a pre-application consultation for a proposed residential development and erection of school with associated engineering works, open space and landscaping at land east and west of East Houses Road, East Houses, Dalkeith. The purpose of this report is to afford members the opportunity to make comment on the proposals at this very early stage of the planning application process or planning process in line with guidance reported to committee at its meeting in June 2017. The applicants have engaged in a public consultation exercise which includes holding a public drop-in session. The report outlines a provisional planning consideration with regard to the development plan and material considerations. The site is not allocated in the adopted 2017 Midlothian Local Development Plan, and as such the principal residential development and the erection of a school on the site conflicts with the development plan policy. A material consideration in the assessment of any application, if one is submitted, will be the need for additional housing and the need for a school. With regard to the demand for housing, it is relevant to note that the Midlothian Local Plan has identified sufficient housing allocations to meet its housing requirement, and as such the Council does not need to support the proposed housing. With regard to the need for a school, if the Council, through its review of its learning estate strategy, determines that a new school is required within the Dalkeith East Houses catchment area, in particular on this site, then the need to meet this educational demand would be a material consideration that the committee could give significant weight to do so. However, it is worth noting that this consideration is based on the indicative information available at present. A detailed assessment of any proposal will be made if a planning application is forthcoming. The applicant could submit a planning application once the public consultation has been concluded. It is recommended that the committee notes the provisional planning position set out in the report, that any comments made by members will form part of the minute of the committee meeting, and that the expression of a provisional view does not fetter the committee in its consideration of any subsequent planning application.
Thank you very much. Anybody got any comments they want to make at this point, which of course is without prejudice to the final outcome if indeed an application comes forward? Councillor Milligan.
Thanks, Councillor. And keeping in mind when the application comes forward, if they're supporting information, I may have a change of mind, but I'm quite frankly alarmed that we have a site that's sitting outside the local development plan being brought forward like this. I can understand the fact that the Director of Education is looking urgently for an area for schooling since the local development plan has been adopted, with the numbers being generated near Dublin since the last calculation. Some time back, the last local development plan were 0.24, and in this we're now up to 0.48. So therefore I can understand why a site for a primary school is site specific, and that part I can understand. Why a developer is coming forward with any land out with the local development plan for additional houses, and especially at this scale, is really concerning to me, because Midlothian is already having to take the biggest hit in Scotland for housing. When we're looking for our infrastructure creaking, and the reason we're running for a school is simply because of that growth in the area. So I would take some real convincing, and keep in mind there was a major public consultation on this. To bring this forward just now, I think it's maybe opportunism, and I would genuinely need some real convincing with the final papers for you ever even consider supporting this.
Thanks very much for that. Did you indicate, Councillor Smell?
Yeah, the situation is, of course, much more complicated because, as a council, we looked at the school estate strategy in the summer of last year, and all of us, particularly the councillors involved in East, were sworn to secrecy because there was commercial and confidence issue to do with negotiating possibly part of the triangular site to the west as a site for the school. At that time, we were reassured that the owner of the land had frequently been told that there was no possibility whatsoever of housing on that triangular section because it would lead to coalescence. The Council therefore has got itself into a very difficult position of claiming that the primary school in the sharp end of the slice of brie does not constitute coalescence, but somehow the housing would constitute coalescence. And I think that's possibly meant that we've opened this Pandora's box of revisiting the whole question of Kippy law, a word that does not appear in the paper, but I think that's the word that most people use to refer to this site. I myself am not convinced that we've exhausted all the possible sites for a school servicing East Houses and to a lesser extent Woodburn. I've suggested in the past that since we have a problem with the existing East Houses park, a very large park that is very run down, actually it might be a brilliant idea to have a primary school there with a mile-long running track around it and changing facilities and a proper pavilion instead of the run-down assets we currently have. I have some interest in officers in the council, but it's not gone very far. If it is the general will of the communities of East Houses and Mayfield that all of this land should be left just as it is, then I would be inclined to start looking at other more radical alternatives for the siting of the school that we will undoubtedly need. If, on the other hand, there's a middle ground, it's clearly less sensitive to develop the western side slice of Bree than the eastern side, much larger estate, which completely compromises the Kippulaw Steading development, a very attractive and important historic feature of the landscape of Midlothian, and a patch of ground that creates the great separation between Dalkeith and East Houses stroke Mayfield. So while I'm not entirely ruling out some compromise in this, I think we need to look as a council radically again at our strategy for a school on this site, and to treat the developer fairly, but also to think about the community's interest in maintaining separation between the communities.
Thanks very much indeed. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo those comments. I think that we're setting a very dangerous precedent and joining up the communities which we've had this before us before. This is the last bit of farmland in that particular strip of ground, and I think we're losing valuable farm ground by the day, and we can't afford to keep doing this. But I take Derek's point, you know, it's coming in at this point with going against the local plan. It's getting dangerous.